Have you ever felt like your presence was a burden to those who should have welcomed you most? Have you ever spent an entire Christmas hearing laughter coming from the other side of the wall, knowing it was your own children, daughters-in-law and sons-in-law talking about you as if you didn't even exist? That night I, Emma Collins, 75, sat at the table staring at my empty plate, listening to the voices that once called me mother, grandmother, now ignoring any attempt at conversation. No one asked if I needed anything. No one noticed when I went to my room and left everyone celebrating without me. I heard comments, felt the dirty looks, and realized what it was like to be rejected and humiliated on Christmas itself. I spent hours there, holding my grandmother's necklace, trying to understand how I had become such a nuisance to the entire family. But to understand what brought me to this Christmas, I need to tell you how my life got to this point. The truth is, my life has never been marked by major events. My name is Emma Collins, and I was born on December 25, 1948, in the Oak Ridge neighborhood, a quiet part of rural Pennsylvania where the routine hasn't changed for decades. I grew up among ledgers, account books, and stacks of receipts, watching my mother balance what little we had, and my father struggle to keep his small business open during the worst winters. From a young age, I learned the importance of not spending more than you have. Perhaps it was this excessive caution that shaped me into a strict, detail-oriented accountant, and according to my children, incredibly tough. I spent 38 years sitting in the same chair at Spencer & Mather, reviewing statements, checking cents, teaching interns never to round up. I didn't become a boss, I never made a fortune, but I earned the respect of those who live by spreadsheets and deadlines. My life, at least until retirement began, was predictable, almost mechanical. I'd get up at 6 in the morning, make a strong black coffee, put on my navy blue suit, and leave on the 6:45 bus sharp. I only missed work in case of serious illness or when one of the children needed me. I married young, but became a widow in my early 40s. Michael, my great friend and colleague, was the one who held me together in those months after the loss, even though he was just a friend. In fact, he was more present than any other relative. After some time, Michael and I grew apart. We only met again years later, already retired, in a coffee shop where, curiously, we didn't talk about accounting. We laughed about the silliness of the past, remembered old colleagues, and even arranged to meet again. There wasn't time. A few months after that coffee, he passed away. I still keep the last note he left in my mailbox, thanking me for that ordinary morning. My children? These days, each one lives their own life. Laura lives in New Jersey, says she works too much, but never mentions visiting. Douglas owns a business in Philadelphia, rarely responds to messages, and always makes excuses to avoid longer calls. The grandchildren are grown, gone to college, and now only send birthday photos to the family group, without even asking if I'm okay. My daughters-in-law and sons-in-law barely greet me when I show up at a party. It's become routine for me to sit at the table and realize that no one notices when I arrive, much less when I leave. If there's a problem in the family, I'm the first one called to solve it, but I'm also the first one to hear complaints when something doesn't go as expected. It doesn't matter if I help with money, advice, or time. It seems to them that it's always been my obligation to be available, and, at the same time, my reserved manner has become a joke among the younger ones. Here at home, everything bears the mark of time. The antique clock inherited from my father still keeps true time, even with its glass cracked since 1984. The bedroom dresser holds mementos of my grandmother, especially a worn gold necklace she gave me for my 15th birthday. I always keep this necklace in the back of the drawer, wrapped in a yellow scarf, and only take it out on truly important dates. It was with this necklace around my neck that I graduated, baptized my children, and buried my husband. It's my only true amulet, a symbol of strength and resilience from women who've been through worse than I have. Just touching the gold clasp makes me feel firmer, as if my grandmother's hand were clasped in mine again. There's no one around to ask how my day was. The television keeps me company almost every night, but I prefer to listen to the old radio, even with the noise. The apartment where I've lived for 27 years is on the top floor, facing the main street, and on cold December nights, I always hear the neighbors organizing their own parties. Before, I'd receive invitations to come down and join the building's get-togethers. These days, I barely exchange greetings in the elevator. The only one who really sought me out was Mr. Henry from apartment 212, a widower and former carpenter. He'd come over for coffee on Sunday mornings and never complained about my overly tidy habits. Over the past few months, he's the one who taught me, without realizing it, that kindness is almost an act of courage when no one else expects anything from you. The separation from my family didn't happen overnight. It was slow, like a crack slowly growing in the wall. Small fights over inheritances, arguments over who would be responsible for which commitments, silly disputes over old objects. Whenever there was a misunderstanding, someone would end up placing the responsibility of resolving everything on me, as if it were simple. I heard phrases like, "It was Mom's fault," or "If you had done things differently, none of this would have happened." And I learned not to argue, just accept it. The hardest part is realizing that, even after doing everything right, no one thinks it was enough. Over time, I learned not to wait for calls or unexpected visits. The worst part isn't being alone. It's feeling that, even when the house is full, I go unnoticed. This is a true reflection of my routine for years. The tidy apartment, the table set for no one, the smell of freshly brewed coffee just before 7, the same programs on TV, the absence of my children and grandchildren, the silence of unanswered messages. When I look in the mirror, I see a woman who never craved attention, but also never stopped being available to those who needed it. But at some point, that woman began to be seen as a burden. The discomfort became more evident at every family gathering, every Christmas, every party where my presence was treated as a dispensable detail. I tried not to take it personally, but I always remembered the times when a simple hug from my children could change my day. Today, the only thing left is to accept it. Or at least, that's what I thought. But don't imagine that all of this would be enough to bring me down completely. Even though my routine shows me to be just another silent presence, there are things we only learn when we get older. And maybe you need to know that now. Now tell me, could you bear being invisible even to those who should see you most? Write in the comments. What decision would you make in my shoes? Would you keep trying or move forward your own way? I want to know how you would react if you realized that, to your own family, you've become nothing more than a detail on the Christmas table. Have you ever felt anything similar? Share your story in the comments, because yours could be the turning point for those listening right now. Last Christmas, December 24th, 2023, began like all the others in recent years. An invitation sent by the family group, a time set for 7 p.m., and Douglas, the oldest, had his address. I took the 5:50 bus, knowing that if I'd had to ride, no one would remember. I arrived at the building's gate with the wind biting my face, carrying the same apple pie I've been making since the kids were little. In the elevator, I adjusted the blue scarf around my neck and tried not to overthink. I entered the apartment and immediately noticed my daughters-in-law's eyes, as if checking to see if the guest was really only staying until dessert. I sat at the table with 10 people around me, but no one really looked at me. Conversations began between them, jumping from subject to subject, always about travel, work, other people's children. Occasionally, Douglas or Laura would ask something about accounting, a polite way of keeping me on topic, but the questions were never about me. I felt like I was there to fill a gap, as if my presence served only to save face in front of the neighbors. It wasn't long before the jokes began, disguised as jokes. One of the grandchildren commented loudly that the smell of the pie reminded him of Grandma's days in the past when the parties were long. I heard muffled laughter coming from the kitchen hallway. No one defended me or made any attempt to change the subject. They picked on me for the way I cut the turkey, for arriving too early, for preferring water over the wine they served. At one point, Laura approached me just to ask about an inventory problem that, according to her, only happened because Mom didn't do it right in the past. I stood there, listening to the list of things that had gone wrong because Emma complicated things, or because she always liked to control everything. It was strange to realize how, in their eyes, every small flaw was magnified, as if my job that night was to listen to criticism without ever giving a response. I wanted to leave, but I remained seated, looking at the antique clock on the wall, waiting for the time to leave without seeming rude. Later, after everyone had eaten, a discussion began about my late husband's will. Someone commented that things got all bogged down because of Mom, suggesting I had deliberately created problems. I felt my face heat up, and my hand tightened so tightly on the napkin that I nearly ripped it. I tried to explain that I had only followed the accountant's instructions at the time, but there was no room for explanation. The topic turned into a joke, with comments like, "Emma always thought she understood all the paperwork," or that, if it weren't for her, the family would have sorted everything out a long time ago. It was then that I realized there was no one there for me anymore, just people waiting for the right moment to blame me, laugh, and carry on with dinner as if nothing had happened. As I went to take my plate to the sink, I heard two daughters-in-law whispering, complaining about how long they'd had to put up with the old lady talking about the past. I felt a mixture of anger and shame, wanting to disappear, but I took a deep breath, forced myself to smile at my grandchildren, and returned to the table. Douglas only approached to ask about an old receipt, saying that only Mom knows where to put those things. It wasn't a question, it was a provocation. The others continued chatting, laughing among themselves, and I realized that the more time passed, the less I was noticed. There was no gift, no tight hug, not even a toast mentioning my name. Late in the evening, as everyone gathered in the living room to exchange gifts, I stood by the window, staring at the streetlights. No one noticed. When I decided to leave, I quietly told Laura, who didn't even look up from her cell phone. I walked down the hallway, my legs shaking, my face hot, and I desperately wanted to get out of that building. I descended the stairs slowly, gripping the railing so tightly my fingers ached. The silence of the lobby was more welcoming than the noise of the party upstairs. I walked to the bus stop, the apple pie in my hands, half untouched. No sign of goodbye, not a word of thanks. I spent Christmas feeling like, to that family, I was just a miscalculation, and to some there, probably a mistake that should have been erased long ago. What no one realized that night is that certain wounds don't show up in the photos of the dinner, nor in the videos of gift-giving. They grow silently, taking up space where once there was pride in being a mother, a grandmother, someone who did everything she could. Maybe you've never experienced this, but I assure you, there's no worse feeling than being ignored by the one you've always protected. And that, as cruel as it may seem, wasn't the limit of what I could bear. What came next? I never imagined I'd be able to face it. Late in the evening, while everyone gathered in the living room to exchange gifts, I stood by the window, watching the streetlights. No one noticed. When I decided to leave, I quietly warned Laura, who didn't even look up from her cell phone. I walked down the hallway, my legs shaking, my face hot, and a strong urge to get out of that building. I descended the stairs slowly, gripping the railing so tightly my fingers ached. The silence of the lobby was more welcoming than the noise of the party upstairs. I walked to the bus stop, apple pie in hand, half uneaten. No sign of goodbye, not a word of thanks. I spent Christmas feeling like, to that family, I was just a miscalculation, and to some there, probably a mistake that should have been erased long ago. What no one realized that night is that certain wounds don't show up in photos of the dinner or in videos of gift exchanges. They grow silently, taking up space where there once was pride in being a mother, a grandmother, someone who did everything they could. Maybe you've never experienced this, but I guarantee you, there's no worse feeling than being ignored by the one you've always protected. And that, as cruel as it may seem, still wasn't the limit of what I could bear. What came next? I didn't even imagine I'd be able to face it. The silence of the lobby was more welcoming than the noise of the party upstairs. I walked to the bus stop, the apple pie in my hands, half untouched. No sign of goodbye, not a word of thanks. I spent Christmas feeling that, to that family, I was just a miscalculation, and to some there, probably a mistake that should have been erased long ago. What no one realized that night is that certain wounds don't show up in photos of the dinner, nor in videos of gift exchanges. They grow silently, taking up space where there once was pride in being a mother, a grandmother, someone who did everything they could. Stories like these leave no one indifferent. They change the way we view even the simplest details of our lives. This is the kind of truth that unites those who have felt the weight of being ignored by those who should matter most. Since you're living this story with me right now, it makes sense to reinforce. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because each story here is for those who refuse to accept going through life without being truly seen. I thought I'd reached my limit, But what happened next was the kind of thing no one could ever have imagined. I returned from Christmas in 2023, feeling as if I'd aged 10 years in a single night. The clock in the building's lobby read 2023 when I stepped into the elevator, the apple pie hanging from my arm, half uneaten in its glass dish. The walk from the elevator to the apartment seemed longer than usual, and when the door finally closed behind me, I realized the only sound was the wind rattling the living room windows. I didn't receive a message from any of my children, not even a simple, "How did you get home?" The key hung on the latch, and I left the lights off, except for the yellow lamp near the sofa, the same one I'd bought with my first accounting salary in 1975. I took off my coat, hung it on the hall hook, and went into the kitchen. The smell of stale morning coffee still lingered in the air. I grabbed the electric kettle, the same one Laura had given me in 2016 on a seemingly promising Christmas, filled it with water, and set it to boil. The whistle shook me from my torpor and reminded me that, even without anyone around, I still had some routine. I made some chamomile tea, dropped the pie dish in the sink without looking back, and returned to the living room carrying the cup, as I did on cold December nights when the house was full of voices. I sat on the sofa, turned on the old radio, and the hissing sound from it filled a bit of the silence that seemed to swallow me. The phone lay face down on the coffee table. There were no notifications, no missed calls, no pending audio. I stood there, staring at the reflection of my hand holding the cup, noticing the blemishes on my skin, the prominent veins, the slightly cracked thumbnail. Everything seemed so ancient. I took my grandmother's necklace from the bedroom dresser drawer, the same one that had been kept for years, wrapped in a yellow scarf. I held the gold clasp between my fingers, trying to feel some strength coming from it. I slowly placed the necklace around my neck and looked at myself in the living room mirror. It wasn't vanity. It was almost as if, wearing that necklace, I had regained some value, even if only to myself. I tried to clear my mind. I opened the book I was reading, an 800-page detective novel, a birthday present from Mr. Henry last year. The letters danced across the page. I read the same paragraph 5 times and couldn't understand a single line. I went to the kitchen and put the kettle back on, just to have something making noise, trying to dispel that feeling of emptiness that wouldn't go away. I returned to the living room, sat down again, turned on the radio to the oldies station, and closed my eyes for a few minutes. I remembered Christmases past, the laden table, the children running around the living room. I tried to recall some recent happy memory, but my mind only brought back the sound of the children's muffled laughter, the low conversations, Laura's hurried look when I told her I was leaving. I cried softly, trying not to sob loudly so as not to feel even more exposed, even though I knew no one there would hear. The house seemed too big for just one person. The hand on the antique clock turned slowly, marking each minute as if time had decided to slow down just to test me. There was no gift, no message, no hug, just me, the yellow lampshade, and the scent of tea cooling in the cup. I felt my chest tighten, my back ache, and an overwhelming desire to disappear for a few days, maybe weeks. But I knew that if I disappeared, no one would notice. The cruelest part wasn't the absence. It was realizing that, truly, my presence was never a priority, nor a source of joy for anyone else. I got up, went to the bathroom, and washed my face with cold water. The foggy mirror showed me a woman who had endured more than she should have, for longer than I thought possible. I returned to the living room and checked the landline. Yes, I still have a corded phone, the kind that rings loudly and echoes throughout the house. Nothing. I glanced at the picture frames on the shelf, all turned toward the front door, as if expecting a visitor. I wished I had the strength to believe that it was all just a bad phase, that it would eventually pass. But that night, it became clear. The emptiness wasn't temporary. It was part of the routine. I lay there, waiting for sleep to come, feeling the weight of silence in every corner of the apartment. The radio was still on, playing a slow song from the 70s, but even that didn't help me relax. I looked at the closed door, at the streetlight streaming through the cracks in the curtains, and I wanted to open the window and scream for someone to hear, anyone, even a stranger across the street. But I didn't. I just sat, closed my eyes again, and thought that night, nothing, absolutely nothing, could hurt me more than it already had. What I didn't know was that from then on, some wounds would still hurt in ways I never imagined. The early morning of that Christmas seemed endless. I glanced at the grandfather clock when it struck 3 hours past 10. I'd been sitting on the same couch for hours, with the radio tuned to some random station just to avoid hearing my own silence. It wasn't the first time I'd ended an important day feeling like I'd done everything wrong. I remembered a birthday party I'd had on my 17th birthday in 1965, when my mother forgot the cake and everyone at home said I was too old to want a party. I didn't complain or cry, I just helped clear the table at the end. I grew up thinking that this was what adulthood was all about. Accepting without answers, solving without asking, caring without expecting. It was during that early morning that some memories began to come flooding back. They came from various moments, both recent and ancient. One of the worst was when Douglas, my son, lost his job in 2011, and I helped pay his bills for over 6 months without telling anyone. At the end of that year, he accused me of controlling his life just because I asked about his new job. No one in the family knows this story. I became known as the controlling mother, and I never had a chance to explain. There was also the episode in 2019 when Laura wanted to sell a property that was in my name, and I refused because it was her father's last remaining asset. I was labeled selfish, called stingy even by people who had never paid a bill. The accusations never stopped, and in every family argument at some point, someone would turn to me and say, "It's your fault." I felt a mixture of anger and helplessness, but also a certain shame at realizing that, in all these situations, my reaction was always to remain silent. I looked at my grandmother's necklace, which I wore that Christmas night, and thought of her, a tough but dignified woman. She taught me that those who talk too much lose respect, but also that those who just swallow everything get sick. It was with this in mind that I remembered conversations with Mr. Henry, my neighbor from 212, a man with time-scarred hands, full of carpentry stories, who was never afraid to show weakness. On Sunday mornings, he would sit at my table and, between coffees, say that kindness was a form of resistance. "Emma, don't retaliate. Don't retaliate. Be firm, but not harsh. Too much harshness turns us into stone, and stone no one embraces." In one of these conversations, Henry recounted the months he spent being ignored by his own children after his divorce. He told me he'd started buying extra bread just to give to his neighbors, and he'd stop by the corner store to pick up a flower for the doorman. He did it because, he said, it's better to be remembered for kindness than for spite. I listened to this with some skepticism, but in that empty morning, his voice seemed more sensible than ever. I began to realize that all the effort to be recognized by my children was only bringing me disappointment, and that perhaps the way forward was to stop trying to prove something to those who no longer wanted to see. I opened the living room window, even with the icy wind blowing in. I looked out at the empty street of a city that seemed so distant from the time when I felt like I belonged. I spent a few minutes there, remembering Christmas in 1973, when my husband forgot dinner because he was stuck on hospital shifts. I spent the night preparing food that no one would eat, but back then, I felt like I was fulfilling a purpose. Now, all that remained was a pile of stories that only I remembered, and a feeling that all the effort to keep the family together had been lost amid accusations and indifference. Looking back, I realized I never responded to criticism. I didn't know how to stand up to it, nor did I make a fuss. I preferred silence. Not out of pride, but because I've learned my whole life that there's no point in trying to convince someone who's already decided against you. I understood, after many years, that dignity isn't about shouting or banging on the table. It's about maintaining your own worth, even when no one recognizes it. Mr. Henry used to say that when life closes doors, we need to find other windows to let air in. That night, listening only to the radio and smelling the cold tea, I promised myself I wouldn't eat myself up anymore, trying to be accepted by those who blame me for everything. When I closed the window, it was 3:45 in the morning. I already knew no one from my family would call to ask if I was okay. I felt small, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel hate. I felt a kind of bitter peace, as if I had finally understood the depth of the wound, but also the value of those who don't lose their kindness, even after everything. Little did I know that early morning the idea of retaliation was no longer part of me. What I would do next would change everything, but it wouldn't be through anger. And that's why this story takes a turn that even I couldn't foresee. The sun was beginning to rise when I decided to get up from the couch, my body still feeling tired from the night before. The scent of cold tea hung in the air, and the first streetlights illuminated the kitchen as I put the cup away in the sink. I spent the next morning in silence, thinking about everything I'd heard, remembering every sidelong glance at dinner, and mentally replaying Henry's words. That Sunday, December 25th, while half the city was still asleep, I made a decision that seemed small, but changed everything. I would never again accept being an easy target. I wouldn't confront or apologize for things I hadn't done. Instead, I decided to do my own thing. The following week, I started making small changes. I started going for a walk every day right after breakfast, something I'd always put off because I thought it was unnecessary. On these walks, I stopped to chat with Mrs. Olga from the 8th floor, who always complained about leg pain. I offered to help carry the groceries, and in return, received a jar of her baked cookies. I greeted Mr. Juon, the late-night doorman, and brought him a piece of the leftover Christmas pie. I swapped recipes with the girl on the 13th floor, the one who always makes sweets to sell on the street behind. I began to truly listen to the stories of the people in the building, and I realized that almost everyone harbored some hidden ache. No one is whole after 70, but few people talk about it. In the building, people began to notice me differently. Mr. Arthur, on the 3rd floor, lost his wife and needed company to go to the doctor. I accompanied him twice in the same month, holding his hand in the waiting room. Over time, I began receiving messages on my cell phone. A prescription request here, an invitation for coffee there, someone asking for advice on bills, or wanting company for a consultation. I was no longer just the old lady from apartment 505. People began calling me by name, thanking me for small favors, remembering me for no particular reason. In the elevator, neighbors would look me in the eye. Even the building staff began inviting me to birthday parties organized on the ground floor, something they had never done before. Still, I didn't tell my family. I decided, then and there, that the next Christmas wouldn't be the same. I grabbed a new notebook, a gift from Mr. Henry for my last birthday, and started planning a surprise dinner. I didn't tell anyone. I bought colorful napkins, new candles, and chose a menu that mixed my grandmother's old recipes with modern dishes I learned from my neighbor on my 13th birthday. I went to the market on November 24th, bought fresh ingredients, and hid everything in the refrigerator among the rice and vegetables. I wrote everything down in the notebook: guest list, dishes to be served, music to be played, even where everyone would sit at the table. I decided I would invite not only family, but also neighbors, doormen, people who truly showed they cared, everyone who had been a part of my life that year. During the weeks leading up to Christmas, I dedicated myself wholeheartedly to the plan. I made sure to prepare every detail with my own hands. I washed my grandmother's lace tablecloth, cleaned all the silverware I'd kept since the wedding, and bought new glasses, the kind that come in boxes of 6, on sale at the corner store. It wasn't luxurious, but I took care with every detail. I prepared handwritten cards with each guest's name. For the grandchildren, I gathered mementos from when they were little, photos developed in 2007, old newspaper clippings, and notes from birthdays past. The most important thing about this plan was not expecting anything in return. I didn't do it for revenge, nor to prove a point. I wanted to show that I still had value, not to those who only blame me, but to those who see my presence as something good. And even without telling anyone in my family, I prepared everything with them in mind. I didn't know if they would come, but I left a place for everyone. I didn't think about a speech or an apology or justifying past decisions. The plan was just that, to open the doors to whoever wanted to stay. Deep down, I wanted, for the first time in many years, to feel like I didn't need permission to celebrate Christmas. I wanted a table full of people who truly saw me. Instead of waiting to be invited, I decided to be the one to invite. Instead of begging for attention, I decided to offer company. Instead of expecting recognition, I chose to appreciate those already around. With a week to go until Christmas, the entire building was already buzzing about Emma's surprise dinner from the 505. I smiled inside, knowing that this time, anyone who turned their back would no longer be missed. What I didn't yet know was the true impact of this dinner and how the evening could change everything I thought was impossible. Christmas of 2024 arrived faster than I expected. In early December, I hand-wrote each invitation, using plain paper but meticulously worded. I invited Laura, Douglas, the grandchildren, daughters-in-law and sons-in-law, as well as Olga, Mr. Arthur, the doorman, and even the cleaning lady, Mrs. Vera, who always greeted me in the hallway. I didn't make demands, nor did I express regret. I simply said I wanted to share a Christmas Eve with whoever wanted to be there. I dropped the invitations into mailboxes and texted them to the children, bluntly. "We're having dinner here at my house on the 24th at 7 p.m. I want you with me, but only if it makes sense for each of you." Preparation took up my weeks. I cleaned every corner of the apartment myself, dusted the dishes that had been stored away for years, set the table with the lace tablecloth, and placed candles in the antique candlesticks. My grandmother's necklace was there, around my neck, reminding me of who I was and all I'd endured. I went to the market with a list in hand, buying fresh fruit, roast meat, rice, potatoes, assorted vegetables, and ingredients for my mother's French toast recipe. I did everything slowly, savoring each step without anxiety. I allowed myself the right to enjoy the process as if every detail were a gift. On the 24th, I woke up early. At 10 o'clock in the morning, I was already peeling potatoes, laughing to myself as I remembered Laura's childhood kitchen antics. I set out dishes for each guest, leaving extra plates because you never know who might show up. I put on a comfortable light blue dress, and just before 6 o'clock, I put on my grandmother's necklace. I looked in the mirror, fixed my white hair, and thought, today, no one will make me feel less than I am. At 7:15, the intercom rang. First, Olga and Mr. Arthur arrived, bringing flowers and an orange cake. Then the doormen appeared together, each bringing a typical dish from their families. Other neighbors arrived, all laughing, saying they had never been part of such a lively Christmas. The living room filled up, the table laden with different dishes, the smells of childhood, and genuine laughter. For the first time in years, my house felt alive. At 8 o'clock, I heard the doorbell. It was the family, all together. Laura, Douglas, the grandchildren, all looking wary, as if unsure if they were in the right place. They entered slowly, looking around, wondering at the different atmosphere. People chatting, neighbors feeling at home, me busy but smiling. No one spoke of hurt feelings, no one complained. They just received my hug and heard the invitation. Make yourself comfortable. Today, I want everyone to feel comfortable. When the table was set, I called for silence. Everyone expected perhaps a demand, a rant, or perhaps a bitter speech. Instead, I began by telling a little about myself, without playing the victim. I spoke of my childhood in Oak Ridge, of my first Christmas without my father, of how much I learned about hard work and dignity. I spoke of Mr. Henry, who always repeated that kindness was an act of courage. I spoke of the small joys I'd experienced, the losses I'd endured, and how I discovered that value isn't measured by the recognition of a handful of people, but by the silent respect we cultivate in our daily lives. He said, looking each of us in the eye, that no one is perfect, not a mother, not a son, not a grandson, that for a long time I'd tried to be accepted, tried to get things right, tried to avoid arguments, tried not to cause discomfort. I spoke of the pain of being held responsible for everything, of the loneliness during the holidays, but also of the relief that came when I understood I didn't need to apologize for having limits. I explained that my intention there wasn't to judge, nor to reopen old wounds. I just wanted, for once, to spend Christmas surrounded by people who were truly there. When I finished, there was immediate silence. Some neighbors smiled, others lowered their heads, and my children stood still, as if shocked. Douglas tried to say something, but preferred to remain silent. Laura's eyes were moist, and her grandchildren looked away, a little embarrassed. It was as if no one had imagined seeing me so serene, so calm. I think the embarrassment was greater because, for the first time, I wasn't defending myself, just showing who I am. There was no argument, no fight, no speech about a perfect family. Just a woman saying, in no uncertain terms, that she deserved respect, but that she no longer needed to beg for love. Dinner arrived, the table full, stories exchanged, food passed from hand to hand. No one needed to apologize. The mood shifted, not by magic, but because there, everyone felt the weight and value of what was happening. And I understood that night that I had done much more than just plan a dinner. I had finally turned the page on the story everyone insisted on repeating. After my speech, the mood in the room changed. It wasn't one of those moments where everyone hugs or cries together. The change came in details, almost invisible, but far more profound than any apology. While my children were still processing what they'd heard, the neighbors began to stand up one by one to thank me. It wasn't rehearsed. No one had planned anything in advance. They were people of all ages. Donna Olga, with trembling hands, handed me a bag of homemade cookies and said loudly, for everyone to hear, that if it weren't for me, she would have spent half the year without leaving the house. Mr. Arthur said that, after the doctor visits with me, he started walking around the neighborhood again, something he hadn't done since his wife's death. The building's doormen, Fabio and Jessica, made a point of mentioning the hot coffee they always found in the lobby when they arrived for their early shift. They said that however small it seemed, it made a difference on cold nights. Even the cleaning lady, Mrs. Vera, excused herself to say she missed the good morning notes I left on the elevator door when I knew she was sad. Each story was simple, small, but when spoken out loud, in front of everyone, it revealed a side of me my family had always ignored. To them, I was just the demanding mother, the nagging grandmother, the old woman who asked too many questions. Now, they had to hear and see another version of me, confirmed by someone who had never asked me for anything. Laura was visibly touched. I saw her stare at her own children, as if trying to find in the other's words some reflection of what she had lost over the years. Douglas, normally so confident, remained silent, paying attention to every detail. The grandchildren, distracted teenagers, put their phones aside to listen. They had no choice but to see who I really was, not through the distorted lens of old fights, but through the sincere respect of people who only interacted with me on a daily basis. There, in front of everyone, they realized that this woman, the same one who served tea, baked pie, and lent a shoulder to cry on, also made a difference beyond her role as mother or grandmother. No one imagined that that night would be the turning point. Little by little, my family began to change their ways. Douglas, who at first seemed out of place, got up to help me serve dessert. Laura went to the kitchen to ask about the recipe for baked rice, a dish she said she hated when she was younger. The grandchildren started taking photos, genuinely smiling, inviting their neighbors to pose with them. The table became lighter. Conversations flowed without forcing intimacy, without the burden of someone needing to prove something. I was there, at the center of the dinner, but not as a target, but as a hostess, recognized without needing to ask permission. That night, I received sincere hugs from people who had never hugged me before. The neighbors made an unexpected toast to Emma, who makes this building more human. Everyone raised their glasses, including my children, who smiled without hesitation. I didn't need to hear any dramatic declarations or formal apologies. Recognition came in each person's eyes, gestures, and posture. For the first time, I felt I didn't need to force a reconciliation to feel part of something bigger. My worth was recognized publicly and silently, in simple and genuine gestures. I went to bed late that night, my house still filled with voices and laughter. The last thing I did before turning out the lights was put my grandmother's necklace back in the yellow scarf, mentally thanking her for every word I heard in that room. I realized that some achievements don't have medals or photos to record. They are achievements that only those who have been ignored know how to measure: respect, recognition, and peace of mind. And it was like that, without spectacle, that my story truly began to change. The morning after dinner, I woke with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. The voices from the night before still echoed through the house, mingling with the smell of leftover food in the kitchen and the thank you notes scattered across the table. For the first time in a long time, I woke up without the anxiety of checking my phone or waiting for a call that never came. I looked at my grandmother's necklace, still tucked into the yellow scarf, and understood that it was no longer just a reminder of someone who had left. Now it was also a symbol of what I had managed to build, even when all seemed lost. My relationship with my children didn't change overnight. They continue to lead busy lives, juggling work, obligations, and their own dilemmas. The messages arrived more frequently, yes, but no grandiose declarations or promises of a fresh start. There was also no immediate invitation to another family meal. But for the first time, it didn't hurt. I didn't have to measure my worth by the intensity of their displays of affection. I discovered there's no age limit for discovering your own worth. I began to see beauty in small gestures, in the invitation to coffee with neighbors, in the request for a recipe over the phone, in the simple fact of being recognized by the building staff or by the people I crossed paths with every day. I understood that family, ultimately, can also be built outside of blood ties. I learned to forgive myself for all the times I felt less than, for believing I would only be valuable if someone constantly confirmed it. The truth is, when we stop asking for approval from those who can't or won't give it, there's room to start over in a lighter way. A fresh start is a strange word for those over 70. Many people think this phase is all waiting, all routine, all repetition. I discovered this Christmas that it's possible to reinvent yourself until the very end of your life. Sometimes, the greatest act of courage is opening the door to people who truly see you for who you are, without expecting anything in return. And it also takes strength to accept that some relationships won't be the same again. And that's okay. The important thing is not to let bitterness take the place of hope. Today, when I look at my grandmother's necklace, I remember the stories she told me about strong women who survived wars, losses, and changes no one believed possible. I know I'm part of that chain. Not because I never cried, nor because I was never weak, but precisely because I resisted even when it was easier to give up. My greatest achievement wasn't bringing everyone together at a table. It was finding myself again, realizing I still had value, even if no one said it out loud. If you've come this far listening to me, I want to tell you one thing. Never underestimate your ability to start over. It doesn't matter what people said to you, how many times you were left aside, or who turned their backs when you needed them most. There's always a chance to transform your own story, to seek recognition, not in the roar of applause, but in the peace of silence. Life has no expiration date for those who decide to give themselves a second chance. Have you ever felt like you needed to reinvent yourself when no one believed in you anymore? Because if you've been through this, know that it's never too late to discover your strength. Believe me, sometimes what seems like the end is just the beginning of everything that truly matters. Now it's your turn to speak. I want you to write in the comments, bluntly, "I am stronger than they say." Leave that phrase as a marker of what you felt listening to this story. Also, tell us, at what point in your life were you underestimated, ignored, or had to start over from scratch? What kept you going? Share your story. Here, every word matters. Every story has the power to inspire someone who may be experiencing the same thing right now. Your voice could be the courage someone needs to take the next step. I know this story resonated with you because it touches you deeply, where we keep everything unsaid, everything no one acknowledged. This experience is what's most authentic about us, the struggle to survive when the world seems small and indifferent. Stories like this show us that starting over has no age limit, that dignity and self-worth can never be taken from you. Here, each story is an invitation to reflect on what truly matters and to transform pain into strength, rejection into courage, silence into a new beginning. Now, make this experience count. Like it. Share the video with someone who needs this message. Subscribe to the channel. This space exists so that every story, including yours, is never forgotten. You're already part of this community just by being here. Now, reinforce that by subscribing so you don't miss any stories that challenge the limits of what's possible to endure and overcome. Prepare yourself for what's next. What you've seen so far is just the beginning of what's truly possible to face and overcome. In the next video, you'll hear a story that challenges everything we think we know about survival. The video is already on screen. Watch it now, because what happens there could change everything you think about courage, resilience, and the power of reinvention. Have you ever been through something like this? Tell me in the comments, because your story might be just what someone needs to hear today. Here, no one is alone. Every voice matters. Every triumph inspires. Be part of this movement. This is your turn to be heard.